Okay, our first reader tonight is Kirstin Chen. Kirsten is the author of 3 novels. Bury What We Cannot Take was named a best book of this season by Electric Literature, The Millions, The Rumpus, Harper's Bazaar, and In Style. It was also a finalist for the Singapore Literature Prize. Her debut novel, Soy Sauce for Beginners, was an Amazon bestseller, and her new novel, Counterfeit, is forthcoming in 2022. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that introduction. Thanks, obviously, to Leah and Gwen and Adam for bringing us all together. I know that so many of us are mourning the tragic shootings in Atlanta and also in Boulder. And so thank you for creating this space where we can be together. And also just wanted to special thank you to my students and former students, several of whom I see have logged on. It's so nice to see your faces or your names. So I'm going to be reading from my forthcoming novel. It's called Counterfeit. This is a book that is centered on the counterfeit luxury handbag industry. It's also a book about Asian Americans overthrowing the model minority myth and attempting to redefine the American dream. So in this chapter, the protagonist is a rule-abiding, straight-laced Asian American corporate lawyer named Ava, who gets pulled into her old college roommate's counterfeit handbag crime ring. And when this chapter opens, she is in Guangzhou, China, fulfilling her first assignment. So just a little background about Guangzhou. This is the fake handbag capital of the world. Basically all counterfeit handbags are made in Guangzhou. And in fact, all counterfeits, it is the counterfeit capital of the world. So counterfeit electronics, airplane parts, medicines, all of that is mainly manufactured in Guangzhou. And another thing to note is that a lot of these counterfeits are sold out in the open in giant shopping malls, just like legitimate merchandise. So, counterfeit. Inside the mall, I peered into shop after tiny shop, ogling the handbags crammed onto shelves like grocery cans. These lower tier stores stocked a hodgepodge of brands, a compilation of the luxury handbag industry's greatest hits. The Gucci Dionysus next to the Fendi Baguette, next to the Louis Vuitton Speedy. The more upscale, higher priced stores focused on single brands, Celine or Goyard or Issey Miyake's Bao Bao line in every style and color ever dreamed up. The stores in the highest tier held prime locations right by the escalators. They were spacious and decorated with intention and had actual business names like Cherished Dreams Handbags and Revive the Nation Leather Goods. Taking their cues from real designer boutiques, they displayed each bag like a sculpture beneath a single spotlight. Even their sales staff was super A quality. When I asked to take a closer look at a Chanel clutch on a high shelf, a live young woman clad in a classic tweed jacket and a little newsboy cap adorned with interlocking C's walked me through the replica's many virtues, from the buttery calfskin imported from France to the glistening gold-tone hardware. Across the way, a gargantuan chartreuse Birkin, the size of a bassinet, lured me into an immaculate store that sold only Hermes. With its opulent Instagram-worthy windows featuring random accessories for the haute bourgeois life of leisure, a backgammon set crafted entirely from untreated cowhide, a glossy horse saddle and matching riding crop, this store would not have been out of place on Madison Avenue or Rue Saint-Honoré. In addition to the large handbag section, a corner of the store was devoted to those iconic silk scarves, another to candy-colored enamel jewelry, a third to riotously patterned dishware. I lifted a Kelly bag in a vivid amethyst shade off the shelf and turned it this way and that as though I knew what to look for. A sales associate dressed all in black except for an emerald and magenta silk triangle draped from her neck told me it was a brand new fall color. It's lovely, I admitted. How much? I converted yuan to dollars in my head and was sure I'd done the math wrong, so I sheepishly tapped the numbers into my phone. $1,400. How much did you say? I asked. She repeated the number. It's a good deal. Right, I said. I see. Winnie had said the real thing went for 12 grand. So in a sense, the associate was right. I gingerly returned the bag to the shelf and left, still firmly under the belief that no handbag, real or fake, could possibly be worth that much. No longer in the mood to explore, I went straight to the fourth floor to complete what I'd come to do. It was late morning and the mall bustled with wholesale shoppers wheeling oversized suitcases that would soon bulge with merchandise to be displayed back in Manila and Buenos Aires and Moscow. Tucked away in the very back of the complex, 0421 was modestly decorated and badly lit and had no sign above the entrance. I told the attendant, a model, thin young man with hollow cheeks, that I worked for Fang Wenyi, and he offered me a stool and a glass of hot tea before calling to check on my order. It's ready, he announced, and then went back to tapping on his phone. I looked around, wondering what I was supposed to do next. Pick the bags right off the shelves? Was that the Gabrielle right there in the corner? Could I pull out my phone to discreetly compare it to the picture I'd saved earlier that morning? An older man burst into the store. He was short and muscular, sporting fashionably ripped jeans and pristine white high tops. Nice to meet you, come with me, he said. I was confused. Where? Now he was confused. Where? To get your bags. Oh, I said, good, let's go. He led me down a back staircase that reeked of cigarette smoke. You're American? He asked, scanning me from head to toe. Yes, that's why my Chinese is so bad. He laughed. It's decent. Where are we going? I asked. Down the road. He walked briskly, dodging motorcycles, ignoring traffic lights, and I fought to keep up, raising the palm of my hand to drivers in both a gesture of apology and a plea for them to brake before they hit me. We passed another massive shopping center that specialized in the metal hardware that festooned bags and belts and shoes. I didn't dare ask my companion how these stores, all of which sold the same few items, could possibly survive side by side. That's how little I knew. It would take me a few more months to grasp the size and complexity of the counterfeit accessories trade. The man turned down a narrow street and stopped in front of a shabby-looking apartment building. Here? I asked. He shot me a sidelong look. Yep. He pulled out a ring of keys and unlocked the front door. I followed him down a darkened hallway, listening for signs of life beyond the walls, sniffing the air for cooking smells. The building was eerily still. If for some reason I had to scream, would anyone come to my aid? He stopped before the last door on the hallway and I sized him up. He was only a couple of inches taller than me, but when he pushed open the door, his forearm flexed, displaying ropey muscles, bulging veins. He flicked on a light. A slim length of neon yellow glinted in his back pocket, a box cutter. I took a step back. Hold on, I said, pulling out my phone and studying the blank screen. Sorry, I have to take this call. He left the door ajar. I typed a message to Winnie. This man, older, short, muscular, wants me to go inside his apartment to get the bags? This can't be right. I stared at the screen, willing a response to appear. Who knew who else was inside that apartment, waiting for a naive American to stroll right through? I removed the money from my wallet, 2 measly 20s, and jammed them into my bra. I laced my house keys between my fingers and wondered if, when push came to shove, I'd really dare gouge out an eye. I checked my phone. No response. The man's head popped out around the side of the door, and I started. Ready? What choice did I have? I stuffed my phone in my purse and went inside. Bulging jumbo-sized garbage bags filled the floor of the main room, which was unfurnished except for 2 plastic chairs and a plastic table with an overfilled ashtray, all pushed up against one wall. The door clicked shut and I heard the man turn the lock. Sweat surged beneath my arms, but my mouth went dry. Behind my back, I clenched my fingers around my keys. Want something to drink? I stammered. No, thanks. He picked his way to the kitchen and emerged with 2 green bottles of beer, one of which he held out to me. I shook my head, and he shrugged and deposited the spare on the plastic table. He pulled the box cutter from his pocket, extended the blade, and deftly popped off the bottle cap before taking a long swig. I don't want to take up too much of your time, I said, speaking loudly to drown out my thrashing heartbeat. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and pointed the blade in my direction. I sucked in a breath. You and Fang Wenyi, he said, how long have you been working together? Only a short while, but we've known each other for 20 years. She's very capable, he said, but it sounded like a question. Yes, she's good at her job. He wagged the box cutter like a finger. Yes, too good. I wasn't sure what he meant. She got me in trouble with the big boss. He doesn't like the price she bargained me down to. Make sure she knows it's a one-time thing. I'll pass on your message, I said. I just follow instructions. I'm supposed to inspect the shipment? He stuck the box cutter in his back pocket, took another swig of beer, and belched softly. So where are the bags? I asked. My keys tumbled onto the floor and I bent to retrieve them. He narrowed his eyes. Why so antsy? You're in a rush? Yes, actually. My family's here in Guangzhou. I'm meeting them for lunch, my husband and my son. Your husband, he's American? I knew what he meant. Yes. What does he do? He's a surgeon. How old is your son? 12, I said, and then wondered why I'd bothered to lie. I pictured Ollie and my imaginary 12-year-old crashing through the door to rescue me. The man closed the distance between us, and like one giant muscle, my entire body tensed. When his hand went for his back pocket, a cry rose in my throat. He pulled out his phone. My son's 10, he said, almost as big as yours. He thumbed the screen to show me an image of a chubby boy spinning a basketball on one finger. I could have collapsed onto the heap of garbage bags in relief. Very handsome, I said. Thanks.
Thank you, Kirsten. That was great. Our next reader is Malcolm Friend. Malcolm Friend is a poet originally from the Rainier Beach neighborhood of Seattle, Washington, and the author of the collection Our Bruises Kept Singing Purple in Landia Books 2018. Together with J.R. Mahung, he is a member of Black Plantains, an Afro-Caribbean poetry collective. Welcome, Malcolm.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much to Gwen and everybody at Swanee for putting this together. Really happy to be reading tonight. One of the things that I like to do at a reading is actually start off with a poem by someone other than myself. This is a way to make sure that you hear at least one good poem come out of my mouth, but is also a way to big up either someone who's been an influence to me or someone, a homie whose work has recently come out. And so I'm going to start with a poem by Sheila Maldonado, whose book, That's What You Get, just came out. The poem is titled First Day Ever in Tegus, capital of the homeland, March 23rd, 2012. I used to care. I used to sleep. I used to wonder what it would be like to work in Honduras. Now I know it is hot and draining instead of cold and draining like New York. I will always remember standing in front of students in a classroom in Tegucigalpa. Growing up, a million people asked me what the capital of Honduras is. I remember my family's country being a joke. I remember not knowing how to feel about that. I remember my mother always, we share the same mind. While I'm far away, I remember my loved ones. They haunt my sleep. I walk in a dream the further I am from them. I remember being in New York where I know so many people and still never seeing anyone I love in a given week. I remember how I used to get so hurt. Now I just get tired. I remember the feeling in these students' words, the surprise, the joy. I'm glad to replace my memories with theirs. Okay. All right. So I am going to read a couple of poems from Our Bruises Kept Singing Purple and then read some newer work. And so this first poem is titled Promesa, which is the Spanish word for promise, but is also an acronym for the Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act, which appointed a fiscal control board, a junta, to manage Puerto Rico's $70 billion plus dollar debt, and is not at all beholden to the people of Puerto Rico. The poem starts with an epigraph to the inhabitants of Puerto Rico in the prosecution of the war against the Kingdom of Spain by the people of the United States in the cause of liberty, justice, and humanity. Its military forces have come to occupy the island of Puerto Rico. They come bearing the banner of freedom, inspired by a noble purpose to promote your prosperity. Nelson A. Miles, 1898. Promesa. After Romeo Santos, usher in the US government. Tu cuerpo en la cárcel. Do I have to tell you of the prisoners? Of Alviso Campos or Lopez Rivera or Abuela, trapped forever in a tomb in Miami, came to this country promised an American dream, cancer the nightmare she never woke up from. Tiene control sobre mí, mi isla. The bombs dropped over Vieques. I hear skeletons rattling when Caribbean waves reach shore. Has this always been your promise? For my joints to be crushed into sand? For the waves to be my only elegy? I'll give you my heart, but you gotta promise. Promise you'll hold me when these nerves finally settle into themselves again. Prométeme que no me vas a dejar without at least promise of proper burial. Somewhere these bones can finally be left alone. All right. The next poem is written in the voice of Marcus Stroman, who is a Major League Baseball pitcher. At the time, he was with the Toronto Blue Jays. And following the 2013 World Baseball Classic, which is basically the World Cup equivalent for baseball, though it's pretty new, he expressed interest in pitching for Team Puerto Rico. And then in the 2017, the next edition, ended up pitching for the US instead, which led to a lot of backlash on social media, including people saying that he's not really Puerto Rican because he grew up, was born and raised in diaspora, which is a common thing that is said. Poem in which Marcus Stroman addresses Puerto Rico on the issue of its Puertorriqueñidad, revolving around the line, Puntatu la Viera. Call me a traitor, but I prefer island. Like you, distant pebble in the sea. Memory is the ocean I have to cross. The pain of this necessary voyage. Too many graves call for my bones. I understand that hope is fragile, but I'd rather not assign politics to a fastball. The bat splinters the same no matter my jersey. The ball stitches still callous my fingers. That is the only purity I know. How these battered hands remind me rebelling against the mob of stars took me nowhere. These battered hands remind me rebelling is the only purity. I know how the ball stitches still callous my fingers. The bat splinters the same no matter my jersey. But I'd rather not assign politics to a fastball. I understand that hope is fragile, but too many graves call for my bones. The pain of this necessary voyage, memory, the ocean, I have to cross you, distant pebble in the sea. Call me a traitor, but I prefer island. Okay, let's read some new stuff. All right, and this next poem, the next poem, it is titled Diasporican Interview featuring Rene Marquez. Rene Marquez wrote a really famous play, La Carreta, super famous Puerto Rican play, in which it details a family moving from Puerto Rico to the States, and the patriarch of the family ends up dying in the States, and the family ends up moving back to Puerto Rico. And one of the lines after the patriarch of the family dies is, no quiero que lo entierren en la tierra sin sol, costará mucho llevarlo a Puerto Rico. And so the question that is repeated in the poem is adapted from that line. Diasporican interview featuring Rene Marquez. How much will it cost to bury your father in Puerto Rico? A Caribe he hasn't touched since he was my age. The family he hasn't seen in decades. All the Hail Marys he uttered in Spanish on this side of the Atlantic. How much will it cost to bury your father in Puerto Rico? My love is Malagasy. One summer she visited a family tomb, witnessed a bone-turning ceremony, and sent me the video. She tells me her father will be buried in the family tomb. When I don't watch the video right away, she questions why I can't see how important this is to her. She tells me she wants our children to visit one day, to visit their ancestors. How much will it cost to bury your father in Puerto Rico? My abuela was born in Ponce, died in New York, was buried in Miami. My dad was born in Ponce, grew up in New York, lives in Seattle. How much will it cost to bury your father in Puerto Rico? When my love asks where we'll bury my dad, I have no answer. How do you dig a grave for someone whose bones have grown accustomed to shuffling, have never known a soil that wanted to hold them? How much will it cost to bury your father in Puerto Rico? When my love asks where I want my ashes scattered, I can't decide on Pacific or Atlantic, on African, Caribbean, or US shores. I've always known dust to be a poor vehicle for the soul and water too expedient a vehicle for the body. How much of me will be left by the time the dirt hits the ocean's waves? How much will it cost to bury your father in Puerto Rico? I've only ever been to Puerto Rico once. It was on someone else's dime. It was on Puerto Rico's dime. By the time I left, I was ready to be back in my own bed. I knew this place would never be my home. How much will it cost to bury your father in Puerto Rico? A casket or urn that will carry him out? A flight back across the Atlantic? A funeral plot on a piece of land that may be his, but will never be mine. All right, and to finish off, one last poem on a happier note, because I'm trying to end readings on happier notes. Diasporican School of Poetry, after Willie Perdomo. We gave up on happy endings. La Isla became a myth. Tierra del Eden and all that, a paradise many of us would never return to. New York became our San Juan until it wasn't, or until we remembered the archipelago was always more than just San Juan, that we had Ponce and Mayagüez and Humacao, or until we decided all we needed was a CD player blasting La Voz and Maelo, a chuleta sizzling garlic in a frying pan next to a pot stewing habichuelas. Spanish became optional as long as you could dance salsa, or recite Clemente stats by memory, or make some mean-ass coquito come Christmas, or just hang a bandera with the correct shades of red and blue in your window. To understand all of this, el orgullo, la vergüenza, everything in between. Picture me sitting in the car with my dad. We are on the way home from the airport. Eddie Palmieri's Puerto Rico blaring from my laptop. And dad has to resist the urge to pound his hands on the steering wheel like it's a set of timbales. And he smiles as another Nuyorican praises an archipelago he hasn't seen in over 30 years. And for the first time, I see him in the only place he has ever known as home. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. That was really lovely. Mike Juster, a 2005 fellow, has published 10 books of original and translated poetry, most recently Wonder and Wrath with Paul Dry Books in 2020. His translation of Petrarch's, there are all these words in the bios. I should have asked you all how to pronounce Canzoniere, will be released by W.W. Norton in 2023. His work has appeared in Poetry, Paris Review, and Hudson Review. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, Mike. I think you're muted.
Did we lose him? Oh.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks. Sorry about that. I'm on a borrowed computer. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm very grateful. In fact, I've been wallowing in sentimentality all week. And so I thought I would actually start with a poem set at the Writers' Conference, and I'd follow Malcolm's lead and read one that's not by me, but one of the faculty members that year. And the backstory on this is when I showed up to register and I met Wyatt Prunty for the first time, I dutifully said, well, is there anything that fellows are supposed to do? And he looked at me and said, well, not really, but sometimes things come up. And I figured, well, I'm off the hook, right? And then a couple days later, he waved me over and he pointed to one of the faculty members and his wife, Joe and Dorothy Kennedy, and said, he said something like, God bless them, they're going to everything, and I'm worried they're going to wear themselves out. Would you mind driving them around? And I said, you mean like be a chauffeur? And he said, yeah. And I said, that'd be great. So I was driving them around at dusk, and we saw something beautiful. And I told a story about a public radio piece I'd heard driving down about this very phenomenon. And then 2 years later, I picked up Joe's newest book, and this poem was right there. Fireflies, for A.M. Juster. Concupiscent, the fireflies cruise our twilit lawn. They stay out late, blinking their signs to advertise. Stud wanted, and bright male seeks mate. With intermittent lust, they blaze just for a fortnight's fling, as if their code were fixed. Enjoy your days, die young, and leave a handsome stiff. One temptress sucks a tourist in with counterfeit come hither flashes, like those of females of his kin, but in her jaws, his hopes turn to ashes. Somehow their incandescent dance obscures our dark view of the dark's enormity as they advance by graceful swoops that end in sparks. Complacently, we watch them glow like kindly lantern lights that sift through palm fronds in Guantanamo on the torture squad's night shift. Sorry about blowing that ending, Joe. I'm going to one up Malcolm and do a second poem that's not by me, a collection of short poems. This is a translation I worked on off and on for 20 years from an East African language called Oromo. And I believe this is the first literary translation of anything from Oromo into English. And it ran in poetry 5 years ago. East African proverbs. Let the relentless fist be kissed. The salt cannot be cooked. The past is overlooked. Full once they nibble, fleas quibble. Teeth in a hyena's face always slide into place. No donkey can cart what weighs down your heart. Outside, a man is respected. At home, that man is neglected. The strangers weep and leave. Family members grieve. Even half-blind men hope to see again. True words end, lies extend. And that got me thinking about proverbs and cliches, just so ingrained in our language, we don't think about them. And then when we hear them from other languages, they seem so exotic. And that provoked this. Proposed cliches. Softer than an old potato, too moldy to mash. More user-friendly than a hooker hard up for cash. Love is like a hard time sentence, but better than cancer. Ask not what your country can do for fear of the answer. Beauty beheld is merely skin deep. Infections are deeper. The price of honesty is steep. Candidates are cheaper. A drowning man may clutch at straws, but his sipping is pathetic. Burn the candle at both ends if you want to wax poetic. You can call off your dogs, but your cats will ignore you. If actuaries had wings, they still would just bore you. An apple a day keeps the doctor away, but not your disease. Blood is thicker than water, except when they freeze. It's all spilt milk under the bridge, so don't be big babies. If you're crazy like a fox, get tested for rabies. Now I'll move to a Southern poem. This was written during a long drive in the back roads of the South. Behold, let the state highway cleave cold, stubbled fields so that both empty lanes extend like grace, and let prim churches in the ratio of 7 Baptists to each Methodist appear with rigid regularity close to the road, their dead even closer, with small, flat, rusting markers on most graves. Then drive another 20 minutes more to see the trees defer to furrowed soil, except for this one rise where pines aspire to reach, where hawks and turkey vultures rule. And let those who have nursed the dirt behold the blush and burgundies of morning clouds that dare not stifle early rays of dawn from blanketing the hillside's eastern slope, where mothers, fathers, aunts, and uncles wait as gravestones chalice that unearthly light. Next poem is called Vertigo. Generally, I don't like to talk about the form of the poems. This one's a little bit weird, so I thought I'd mention it. It's in couplets. They're tetrameter, dimeter couplets, and there's an identity rhyme linking each couplet. And so it's supposed to be a little bit repetitive, a little bit like some of the French forms. Vertigo. The world turns liquid, reels and rolls as gravity veers at angles. What was still is blurred and whirled. Revolutions echo, you lie still for hours, too weak for vomiting and still too dazed for prayer. No whiz-bang device can repair your inner ear. Doctors try shifting crystal shards like sad wizards. Sometimes it's magic, sometimes not. They never know. They never know what to advise if that trick fails. Focus your eyes on horizons, one whispered once. It helps to refocus the brain. The brain resets. The brain can reset in the ways my father's did. When his tumor nicked a vein, cells drowned in blood. His bloodied brain regathered words, word by word. Grace is not crystalline, but grit that squints at pain. Grace is the will to retake things, thing by thing. The impossible in which I believe. Borges is in. This library is more alive. When he arrives, the possible becomes more so. I offer him his cup of tea, but it is seldom tea time where Borges is. In this library, the volumes ripple on the shelves and yet keep rising like the fire the possible becomes. More so than you might think, these books extend through time or space once it is clear Borges is in. This library is never ghostless as it glows through dreams of visitors who know the possible becomes more, so much more than those who grace these aisles, than dust that dances over files. Borges is in this library. The possible becomes more so. This is the title poem for my newest book, Wonder and Wrath, which you can't read because it's backwards on Zoom. I've been writing actually a fair amount lately in Old English alliterative verse, which I have found to be great fun and very helpful at stripping away things that you don't need to say. 3 visitors on Christmas Eve. Mist on moonspill as midnight nears. Adrift but not dreaming, our drowsy sun is covered and kissed. At the kitchen door, our basset is barking. Out back, coyotes are standing like statues down by the dogwoods. Across the crystal of crusted snow, they search for stragglers who startle and run. Their vigil reveals no victims this night. Trash would be trouble. They trot away unbothered by blood-throated baying and growling. No star distracts their stealthy march. The highway hums. They howl through the calm, then savor new scents that spice their path in this world awash in wonder and wrath. So this is the 2-poem warning. I did a whole weird book of Billy Collins imitations called The Billy Collins Experience. And so I thought I'd pull out one of those. Love poem. They say you have to love yourself to love another. And so for you dear, only for you, well, let me start again, I'm sorry. Love poem. They say you have to love yourself to love another. And so for you, dear, only for you, I am focusing only on myself. I wore my silk pajamas all day long in case the moment was right. Mid-morning, my yellow roses arrived. I was touched by my gesture, but before long, they wilted in the kitchen window. Later, I sent myself chocolate, rich erotic chocolate, but within minutes, it made me feel fat. A passionate note to myself only ignored my issues, and I never seemed to talk to myself anymore. I have even become insensitive to my own needs. Perhaps, my love, the answer is couples therapy. And I thought I would close with my work in progress. I'm actually signed up to do something that I believe has never been done before, which is a complete translation of Petrarch's Canteenery that replicates the meter and rhyme. And I'm about 85% through, but it's really wearing me down now. I've done all 317 of the sonnets and the shorter poems. I'm working now on the longer ones, and it's a bit of a slog, but hopefully it'll be done in draft by Labor Day and be out in early 2023. And this is Sonnet 118 from the Canteenery. I leave my 16th year of sighs and head into my final one, although it seems I've only just begun exploring ways to agonize. The bittersweet, my loss is wise, and life a weight. I pray my run of bad luck ends. I'd be undone if death did shut her lovely eyes. Sadly I stay, but long to go, and long for longing that is past, and fail at partial resolutions. New tears for old desires show I am unchanged. I have held fast despite 1,000 revolutions. Thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody showing up tonight.
Thank you, Mike. That was great. Our last reader is Emilia Phillips. Emilia is the author of 4 poetry collections from the University of Akron, of the University of Akron Press, including Embouchure and 4 chapbooks. She is a faculty member in the MFA writing program and the Department of English and cross-listed faculty in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program at UNC Greensboro. Welcome, Emilia.
Thank you so much, Leah. And thanks so much to Gwen for inviting me to join you all. It's been a pleasure reading with Kirsten, Malcolm, and Mike. I'm going to be reading tonight from my new book that just came out. It's called Embouchure, which essentially refers to the way that your mouth, the kind of form that your mouth takes while playing a wind instrument. I was a trumpet player all through elementary, middle, and high school, so it's a concept that's near and dear to my heart. And I used it to think about like speaking out and thinking about, in particular, coming out as queer, and also thinking about talking openly about mental health issues. So I'm actually going to focus tonight a few of the poems on mental health in particular. And this first poem is called Ha Ha Boo Hoo. When I keep crying long after I've started laughing, my therapist says it's my body grieving because I haven't grieved properly, as if my body has unfinished business like defecation after death, but it seems to go on for hours and hours, even days. And I think maybe crying will never end the way some people hiccup and then live the rest of their lives sleeping and waking, their diaphragm skipping like a jump rope, a word I just misspelled just now before I corrected it for you, dear reader, because I was told that's what you need. When I was a kid, I thought damn was spelled D-A-M-B, like lamb. And a few years ago, I asked my gynecologist for an IED so I wouldn't get pregnant. I wouldn't have to have. I talk too much when I get nervous or when I drink too much, which makes me nervous, which makes me drink too much, which I did the other night because I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. And my heart is like bubble gum chewed for the world record for which I am crying. For the record, I'm crying. This is called Poem About Death, beginning with a humble brag and ending with a shower beer. Today, for once, I did not think of death. I avoided him like all men in public by pretending to read, by putting my earbuds in to drown out his I still need you babies with I still need you babies with Patsy Cline's I go out walking. I watched the unglued soles of his black Converse high tops pass in front of the bathroom stall into which I retreated when I needed to decompress from teaching. But I didn't say anything, only fished in my purse for a pink clonazepam that had spilled out into the bottom with all the pennies and single sticks of gum. I have to take this, I said when he later approached, and then I helloed into my phone, although it hadn't rung. I tried to look busy all day. I answered emails I'd been putting off, and I even remembered to say thank you for your patience instead of sorry for my delay. I invited students into my office to ask about their summer breaks, and I heard about a job pet sitting 4 dogs, 2 cats, some sea monkeys, and a snake. I asked the student if she had to drop mice by their tails into the hot tank. They were brown and frozen in bags with freezer burn on their noses. I remembered then that snakes smell with their tongues, remembered one flick against a glass enclosure. I remembered then what it was like to be kissed by death, his tongue like an old limp carrot left too long in the crisper drawer. Sometimes I imagine sticking it into one of those old-fashioned pencil sharpeners mounted on the wall, the sizing guide, the little crank, the shavings coming out in coils, you know. Once, when we were together, Death forgot my birthday. I had to plan the party and smear the cake with buttercream myself, but Death took all the credit. He was often like that, a man of consequence, some would say. He never laid a hand on me, but any time I told him he had hurt me, he would say, "I don't know what you're talking about." I began to think that maybe I was making it all up. "Maybe you are," he said without moving his lips. And I began to worry he could talk to me telepathically. That seems like something Death could do, I reasoned. But maybe his voice in me was me too. It sounded funny after all, a little off like Bob Dylan in the late 80s, his voice just starting to turn to wet concrete. Most of the time, I don't think about Death except when he drunk texts in the middle of the night or happens to run into me buying milk. Sometimes when we'd make love, as he liked to call it, I was too drunk to say no. Sometimes when I was under him, his sweat dripping off his brow and stinging into my eye, I would think about a woman and how she tasted after we walked around the city for hours, finding every excuse to delay, returning to the hotel room where we could barely admit we had for reasons we couldn't say aloud, even to one another, even though we both knew. Today was a small triumph. As I said, I didn't think of him at all, but I can't say he wasn't there, isn't still, here in the muscle after I've undressed, in the brown bottle at my lips, in my hand on my breast, and in the steam I inhale. And this poem's called "I Have Anxiety About Anxiety." Take a sip of water here. "Listen," said the hem of my right pant leg. "I might unravel unless you worry I might unravel." So this was my long-term strategy for keeping planes airborne, a slipstream of possible outcomes, and after the worst, the afterlife, two choices, lightning held in the body forever, or else a mouthful of milk curd. But now my heart says nothing except too much when the nurse listens with her little finger, eyes on her watch. Every bit of news is carried on the backs of invisible pack animals. I feel the donkey kick turn my breast to smushed eggplant. I worry about my worry. I revise it like a web, which means I have to thread it over doubly complicated. "Excuse me," said the fire that had not started, sometime in the middle of the night. "Well, here we are again," I said to the dark, to the smell of smoke I invited in from the cold of memory. A fire that's never been started is the hardest to put out. Sometimes I drink a whole French press and wonder why I'm sweating incessantly. Maybe the cancer's returned, or else you'll stop loving me. Sometimes I imagine the inside of my body like the interior of a fable. My heart's a cocoon, and its night moth can't break free. And the last poem I'll end on is a poem that I wrote in response to the common experience that I had of telling a story at a party or something, and someone saying, "Oh, you should write a poem about that." So this is called "You Should Write a Poem About That," they say. No, I shouldn't. I'm ill-equipped to crack a Corbel bottle on the butt end of every sinking ship. No, I don't need to torture and rack that amoebic memory of that time I lost my virginity, which I don't remember too clearly anyway, or that day I got caught picking my nose in the first grade, its trailing flower girls pedaling, shame, shame. I don't want to track how many steps it takes me to reach Chimney Rock or bookmark every page in my browser history. Believe me, some secrets want to leap from the Golden Gate, and heave into the turbid bay, its anonymous blue crusting into angels' brief shorn wings. I don't keep a good record of all my losses, for casualties, remember, are the dead and the injured. No, there's really no place for my favorite word, landfill, or my old dog who used to roll on dead animals. A man once told me I'm cold for a woman. Another said I don't deserve. No, I couldn't solve the paradox. How many griefs would I have to remove from my heap of griefs until it no longer crushes me? At a rainy spring graduation, the commencement speaker says, I can't wait to upload my consciousness to the internet. I'm uneasy with anything that stinks of the singularity, of my heartbeat becoming prosody. Sometimes I think my doing is more like don'ting, moving always on the great American script of interchanges and exits. No, I don't wish to make more of the mouthful of my mother's cigarettes I gulped from a Diet Right can, the dog with no hair she kept in the spare room. My poet's coat of arms is a cowbird on a skittish lamb. No, thank you. I think I'll just lie down and shut the blinds. Please bring me a sip of water. My mouth's dry. And yet you'd ask me to magnify the sun to fire. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Could everyone unmute and let's give them, our wonderful readers, a round of applause they can actually hear.
Right, clap for him, Gemma.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was a really terrific group of readings.
Yeah, I'm done.
And now Gwen Kirby will take over and moderate. And we will come up with a question or two to kick us off if you all don't. But the floor is open to you all to ask our readers what's on your mind.
All right, so thank you first off for those wonderful readings. That was such a joy. To ask a question, you've got two options. Either you can go ahead and just type them into the chat and I will read them for our readers. Or if you'd like, you can use the raise hand feature. So a little blue hand is going to come up next to your name in the participants and I will call your name and then you can ask the question yourself. So yeah, the floor is open to you, but I guess while you all ponder possible questions, we can open with a question that we've been asking all of our readers, which is, you know, how has writing been for you during the pandemic, and has it changed your writing at all this last year?
I can jump in. I think writing has been shockingly productive for me over the pandemic. And I will say right out front, I don't have kids, and I think that's a big part of it. And I know that parents are really struggling right now, but I think that the reason that it's been fruitful for me is because it's the only thing that feels the same as pre-pandemic. Like I write in this room by myself. In my computer, I have everything that I need. And it actually, especially early in the pandemic, was really soothing to be able to work that way. And it really made me appreciative for being able to have that.
For me, I don't know that it's very different. You know, I've got mobility issues for medical reasons and don't get out very much most of the time anyway. So it hasn't been that much different. It's removed some distractions, which in some ways has been very helpful because I'm doing this massive translation project. And there are days where you just say, I don't really want to be doing this. But when you've got no place to go, it makes it a little easier to say, okay, well, let's go back and get it done. So I think for most of the pandemic, it hasn't been that much different. Although I will say the last few months, it seems to have been a lot harder being separated from the world. Although I don't know that it's hurt the work particularly, but it's been a lot harder the last couple months.
Yeah, I mean, it's been rough, but not because of the pandemic, more so because over the summer I was looking for a new job and now I'm in a new job. And so my time is getting eaten up in other ways. But yeah, I would agree and say that things like writing is the one thing that seems the same, regardless of whether I am able to leave my house or not. And so yeah, it's mostly been other things that have been keeping me from writing.
Yeah, I would just jump in and say that, like, I don't know. I mean, I just don't always have the mental space for writing during the pandemic. And just like taking care of like emotional needs, also being there for family, being there for friends, etc. And so I've been okay with little fallow periods I've had throughout the pandemic. I think they are ultimately incredibly important to my writing process and also just important to my mental health. So, you know, it's been on and off writing in the pandemic, but that's okay.
Thank you all. Please feel free to post questions, or you're just going to get me asking more and more questions. Emilia, I had a question for you. Something I noticed during this reading, and something that I have always really loved about your work, is that you tackle, I think, really challenging and really interesting subject matter, and yet you're so funny. There's just so much like wit and humor in your poems, in your titles. I felt like every title was almost a poem in and of itself. And so I wonder sort of what you feel like the role that humor plays in your work is, and how conscious you are of using humor to write about such, you know, big and challenging topics.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my first book was so serious, and I've just like written my way toward not taking myself too seriously. And I think a lot of it is just a survival mechanism, especially someone who's experienced a lot of trauma. And when you're being like ultra vulnerable in your own poems and writing about autobiographical material, I just, you know, for me, like the humor is just has to be a part of that. You have to kind of poke fun at yourself, especially when you're talking about, you know, coming out as queer in your 30s and like not being like as aware of your own identity for so long. I feel like that's a part of the way I also show self-love is through self-deprecation. And that sounds paradoxical, but for me, really, it's a kind of like, I guess maybe like a love language or something. Yeah. I hope that answers your question, Gwen. I got really long with these titles in this book. They're pretty hefty.
I love a long title. All my titles are way too long, so maybe that's why I loved it so much. I just thought it was great. We have a question in the chat for everyone from Emma Swanson. It says, what's something that you think you've learned from writing poetry? And I will explain that to Kirsten Kirsten's, pardon me, I'm so sorry, to writing fiction as well. It can be something notable, surprising, etc.
Shoot, I'll bite. I've learned that I have a much shorter attention span than I originally thought I did. Writing and especially reading poetry, when it became something that I was focusing on, reading fiction became a lot harder for me. And I am just now like starting to get back into the groove of it. So yeah, I think I learned that I have a little bit of a shorter attention span than I once thought I did.
One thing that I've learned is that I am very uneasily bored, that I don't have as much curiosity as I maybe once thought. I'm the kind of person that starts a novel and I work on only that for 5 years and I have complete tunnel vision and I can't like write a short story or take a break. So maybe the opposite of Malcolm in some ways. But it's been really instructive because I've kind of started to organize my life that way. Like I don't feel pressure to try new things. I've just like accepted that. Like I pick one thing and I go really deep. So another example is I do Ashtanga yoga and I do it 6 days a week for 2 hours every day. And I used to think like, oh, you should, you know, mix it up, cross train a little bit. And now I think, no, this is who I am. Like I have 4 things in my life and I do them all like really, really intensely.
I guess for me, I was sort of surprised that I could do it at all. I wrote pretty intensely in high school and college, and then gave it up for a long time, and then came back with a lot of hesitancy and really felt very unsure about it. And the first time I was kind of getting serious, I got invited to a poetry conference. I remember getting in the car and having almost a panic attack and almost turning around, deciding not to go because I was so, uncertain about it. So I think in some ways the biggest surprise is that I'm here at all. So
I think one of the things that I continually learn is that and this is something I learned, I was introduced to from Claudia Emerson, who was a faculty member at Sewanee, later a faculty member at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I did my MFA, and who became my friend and mentor. Although she was never directly my teacher at VCU, she came after I was there. Was that as she got older, she said she became a more generous reader. And I think one of the things that poetry has taught me is that it doesn't have to be limited to certain aesthetics. And I was just teaching my grad class today, my grad poetry workshop, and we were reading Ellen Bright Voigt's The Art of Syntax. In the beginning of the chapter that we read today, I said, conventions are tyrannical. I really believe that. I really feel like there's a lot of malleability to language, and I feel like every single time that I come back to poetry, I learn something new from it. I feel like it has expanded my engagement with language or text.
Thank you. Those are wonderful answers. We have a question from Nick Job Phone. I struggle a lot with writing around a topic, around what I'm trying to say, rather than writing to or about it. Do any of you have any advice on how to, now I need to scroll down, and then say like, on how to approach difficult topics without just skirting around or avoiding them?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think it's wonderful that you already know that, because I think that's a big part of it. And this is something that, a friend once said to me when he read one of my stories, the conversation ends just as it's getting good. The people leave the room just as they're about to talk about what really matters. And actually just hearing him point that out was super useful. And so now when I'm drafting a story or a novel and I write a scene of dialogue, I always try to push it a little bit further. And I think like, okay, what if they just went one step further and said this? What if the character said this? What if they pushed each other a little bit harder? Because you can always go back and parrot, you can always go back and take it out later. But I did notice that tendency. I had that same tendency too, to kind of avoid letting the scene get to that really juicy part. So yeah, hopefully just the fact that you know that can help you to sort of troubleshoot your own work.
I think it's important a lot of the time to write the poem that you're afraid to write, because that's what's closest to you and most important and has the greatest number of ambiguities that you need to unravel. And that sounds a little like cliched advice, but I think it really is true. And I think one of the consolations you have being a poet as opposed to being an actor or singer or something is that, you can work it out in the privacy of the page in front of you and can always decide later, whether this is something that you want to share with other people or not. But I think when you're writing your own work, if something is moving you but making you uncomfortable and you're sort of stuck, the odds are, you're blocking on something that is really important, that you ought to think about whether that's really what the poem is about.
Yeah, I'll jump in here too. I was just thinking a lot about a few years ago, I taught at a poetry retreat at the Sundress Academy for the Arts up near Knoxville, Tennessee, another Tennessee place, with the poet Kirstin Chen. And Chen did this amazing workshop and lecture about telling instead of showing. And I think we're so accustomed to hear that idea of show, don't tell, but I think there's so many times when, especially when you're approaching difficult subject matter, maybe you're serving as a witness to something either in your own life or something else that you encountered. And I think that oftentimes you can skirt around that by trying to do that showing rather than the telling. And sometimes you just need to come out and say, like, this is a problem, this is an injustice, and that's how I'm going to address it in the piece. So I would say, like, sometimes you just have to tell instead of show.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go back to something that AM brought up as well, about that uncomfortability, and that maybe that is the space to write from and to write about. Thinking about sort of why am I uncomfortable? Why am I avoiding? Why am I skirting around the topic? What is it about my positionality right now that is making me uncomfortable or making me skirt around this?
Thank you all so much. Your readings were wonderful. This Q&A has been a joy, and just, thank you for reading. Thank you everyone for coming. These sort of monthly reunitings with our community have been a really positive part of this pandemic. And there's not a lot of things I can say that about for the pandemic. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Bye. Good to see you all.
Thanks so much, everyone.
You too, Mary.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.